The ambulance bay doors at Mercy Ridge Medical hit the walls at 3:22 in the morning, and the woman on the gurney wasn't breathing right. Two paramedics pushed hard through the entrance, leaning into the weight of the stretcher, calling out vitals before anyone asked. Gunshot wound, left thoracic. Pressure dropping. Field pack on the wound, applied 7 minutes out. The words arrived in a specific order designed to compress information into the smallest possible window, and the trauma bay team received them the way they always did. In motion, already moving, already reforming into their positions around the incoming patient. All of them stopped within 3 feet of the gurney. Not because of the blood, though there was blood. Not because the patient's skin was the color of old ash, though it was. They stopped because of the dog. A Dutch shepherd, 75 pounds, wearing a tactical vest the color of night, planted itself between the gurney and anyone approaching. It didn't bark. It didn't lunge. It simply stood with its full weight forward and its ears flat and its amber eyes moving from face to face in a systematic sweep that communicated something very clearly. Nobody was touching this patient. The charge nurse, Gemma Thorne, took one step back. The attending on call, who had been snapping on his gloves while walking, stopped snapping on his gloves. One of the paramedics had positioned himself at the far end of the gurney, with the very specific posture of a person who has decided that his current location is correct, and he sees no reason to change it. Nadia Tolliver had been charting at the nurse's station at the end of hour 10 of a 12-hour shift when the radio call came through. She heard the words the same way she always heard late-shift radio calls, with one part of her attention while the rest of her stayed on the screen in front of her, finishing the documentation sentence she was in the middle of. Then the word gunshot registered somewhere below the surface, and she stood up. She reached the trauma bay entrance at the same moment the gurney did. She was not the attending. She was not the charge nurse. Her job, technically, was to step back and let the senior staff work. She stood at the edge of the corridor and watched the dog instead. There was something about the animal's behavior that she couldn't look away from. It wasn't aggression in the way most people understood aggression. It was guardsmanship, the deliberate, practiced containment of a working animal that had been trained not just to protect, but to assess, to sort, to make decisions about who was safe and who wasn't based on criteria that had nothing to do with how friendly you looked or how white your coat was. The dog's sweep stopped. It had reached her. Nadia did not move. She kept her hands loose at her sides and her breathing even and her posture neutral. Not submissive, not challenging, just present. She'd learned that particular quality of stillness a long time ago, in a different context, in a place she didn't usually think about during shifts. The Dutch shepherd held the look for 4 seconds. Then it stepped back from the gurney, not far, maybe 2 feet, but it stepped back, and in the space it created, Nadia was already moving. She heard Gemma say her name behind her, the specific sound of someone who wants to issue a warning and has run out of time to finish the sentence. Nadia reached the gurney's edge and pressed 2 fingers to the patient's neck. The dog watched her do it. It did not move. The patient was a woman, somewhere between 30 and 35, with the compact functional build of someone who stayed in shape because her work required it. The wound was on the left side, below the shoulder blade, exit wound visible from the angle the paramedics had packed her. Whoever had done the field dressing had done it correctly. Tourniquet logic applied to a torso wound, pressure maintained. But she'd been bleeding for a while before the packing went in, and the color of her lips said the clock was already running. "She's tachycardic," Nadia said. "Rate's around 130. She needs to go in right now." Behind her, the exhale of several people who had been holding their breath. Then the attending was beside her, and the trauma bay team reformed, and the dog moved with them, repositioning fluidly, maintaining its position at the patient's feet, with the quiet authority of an animal that had been present in situations like this before and knew exactly how much space to occupy. Nobody argued about it. The dog came into trauma 1, and they worked around it, and it watched everything with the absolute attention of an animal, keeping a full accounting of the room. Her name was Cressida Malone. That was all the chart said. The Army intelligence officer who arrived at Mercy Ridge at 4:15 in the morning was not in uniform. She was a compact woman in her early 40s with close-cropped hair and the particular quality of eye contact that came from years of being professionally calibrated never to telegraph what she was thinking before she decided to share it. She showed her credentials at the nurse's station without announcing herself, asked 2 questions, and was pointed toward the family consultation room where Nadia had been waiting since the trauma bay handed off to the surgical team. Special Agent Lucia Strand, CD. She said it the way people said their own names when the name was a formality they'd already moved past. She sat down across from Nadia and opened a notebook rather than a tablet, which Nadia registered as a deliberate choice by someone who understood that handwriting was harder to subpoena than cloud-synced files. "You were the first medical staff to make contact with the patient," Strand said. "The dog made that possible." "Yes, about that." Strand paused. "That animal is a trained military working dog. Her name is Atlas. She's been assigned to Malone as a service dog for the past 11 months, following Malone's handler's deployment. In 11 months, Atlas has not permitted unsolicited contact from a stranger, not once. Tonight was the first time." Nadia looked at her hands. "We need to understand why," Strand said. "Do you have any prior connection to military working dog programs, or to Malone personally?" "I've never met her before tonight." "And the dog?" Nadia reached up and pulled the lanyard from inside the collar of her scrubs. It was a standard hospital ID lanyard, and most of what was on it was standard: her badge, a small pen, a clip-on light she used for pupil checks, and one other thing. A challenge coin, bronze, slightly worn on one face. The emblem of the 37th Special Forces Support Group, K9 Operations. A dog's silhouette etched into the center. "My brother's," she said. "He was a K9 handler, Theo Tolliver. 3rd Deployment Kandahar. He died 2 years ago, January." She put the coin back inside her scrubs. "I used to visit his unit between deployments, the kennels, the training runs, the whole operation. For 3 years I was around working dogs the way some people are around family. I didn't think about whether it stayed on me. It stayed on me." Strand wrote something in her notebook without looking down at it. "Atlas wasn't reacting to you as a stranger," she said. "She was reacting to you as someone who smelled like someone she trusted." The room was quiet. "I know," Nadia said. Gemma Thorne stopped her in the hallway at 6:40 in the morning and told her she looked terrible and she should go home. Nadia told her she had 40 minutes left on her shift, which was technically true. What she didn't say was that she had no intention of leaving when it was over. She got coffee from the break room on the 4th floor, the one with the window that faced east, and got the first gray of sunrise before any other room in the building. She stood at the window and drank it, and thought about Theo. He had been 2 years older than her, and 6 inches taller, and constitutionally incapable of letting a silence sit without filling it with something, which was part of what made him effective with the dogs. She'd always thought. They knew he was paying attention. They knew he was always in the room with them, not somewhere else in his head. She had become a nurse before he deployed the first time. But she had become the nurse she was because of the 3 years she spent watching him come back from places she couldn't follow, watching what it cost him, watching the dogs absorb what he couldn't carry alone. She had learned things about trauma care in those years that she hadn't encountered until her 3rd year of clinical rotations. She had learned how to read the body of someone who had stopped trusting the people trying to help them, and how to be the thing in the room that was safe when everything else felt like a threat. She hadn't gone looking for that skill. She'd gone looking for her brother. The skill just came with it. Her phone buzzed. It was Strand. She called back before the buzz finished. "There's a man named Boyd Hackett," Strand said without introduction. "He's listed on your hospital staff directory as a patient liaison coordinator. His badge logs show he accessed the 4th floor post-surgical wing 4 times in the last 9 hours. Nadia thought about the 4th floor. Cressida Malone's room was on the 4th floor. "Patient liaisons don't typically make 4 visits in one shift," she said. "No," Strand said, "they don't. He's going in again right now. We need someone with a reason to be on that floor to monitor the situation until my team gets there. 6 minutes. I'll be there in 2. She took the stairs. Hackett was a mid-sized man in his late 40s, moving through the 4th-floor corridor with the practiced ease of someone who spent a great deal of time in medical facilities, or had spent considerable effort learning to look like he did. He was carrying a clipboard and making the specific face of someone checking something unremarkable off a list. Nadia watched him from the nurse's station while she pulled up a chart that had nothing to do with anything she needed. She watched him check the number on Malone's room, look down at his clipboard, look back up. She was at the door 3 seconds before he went in. Atlas made a sound she'd never heard before. Not a bark, not a growl, something between the two, high and sharp, and cutting through the door of the room like it had been produced specifically to travel through walls. Nadia pushed through the door. Hackett was against the far wall, one hand up, the other still holding the clipboard. Atlas stood between him and the bed with her full body oriented toward him and her focus so complete that the air in the room felt pressurized. Cressida Malone, who Nadia had last seen unconscious and intubated, was awake. She was watching Hackett with the dark, evaluating calm of someone who had been trained to assess threat from whatever position she happened to be in. In this case, a hospital bed with an IV in her arm and a surgical drain under her left arm. Her eyes moved to Nadia. Something shifted in her expression. The fractional change of a person who has spent hours calculating the probability that anyone in her immediate environment could be trusted, and has just recalculated. Strand came through the door 40 seconds later, 2 agents with her. Hackett did not fight. He put his hands up before anyone asked him to, and he said, while he was still against the wall, "I wasn't going to touch her. I just needed the chart." Strand told him to stop talking. He did. They took him out. Nadia moved to the monitors, checked Malone's heart rate, adjusted the pulse oximeter that had slipped during the commotion. The number was elevated but not alarming. The body's response to stress, managed, falling. Atlas repositioned to the foot of the bed and lay down. For the first time since 3:22 in the morning, the room was quiet. What Strand needed, it turned out, was more than a statement. She explained it in the consultation room at 10:30, with her notebook open and her partner, a younger agent named Hollis Park, who had the particular habit of looking at his pen while people answered him rather than at their faces, sitting to her left. Boyd Hackett was cooperating. He had been approached 8 weeks ago through an encrypted messaging application by a contact he knew only through a burner number. He had been paid twice, electronically, in amounts that didn't quite trigger automatic reporting thresholds. He had been asked for one thing: access to Malone's medical file, discharge projections, medication schedule, physical therapy timeline, when she would be mobile, when she could be moved. He was a scout, Park said, looking at his pen, not the endpoint. Whoever sent him wanted a window, Nadia said. They needed to know when she would be vulnerable enough to reach and mobile enough to be worth reaching. Strand looked at her for a moment. That's consistent with what we're working with. It also means they have someone watching the facility, not just the patient, the facility. Nadia thought about the parking structure she could see from the 4th-floor break room. The gray sedan she'd registered 40 minutes ago on the 3rd level, same spot it had been when she first noticed it. East parking structure, level 3. Gray sedan. I don't have the plate, but I have the make. Strand had her radio out before Nadia finished the sentence. They moved Malone to the 3rd-floor west wing at 2:15 in the afternoon, logged under a different admission number, with Nadia's assignment kept continuous in the system because changing it would generate a discrepancy in the staffing record that the people monitoring the hospital would notice. Nadia had been on shift for 15 hours by that point. She didn't mention this. It didn't seem like information that would change anyone's decision. She sat with Malone in the new room between monitoring checks, in the chair that wasn't the clinical one. The light was better on the west side. It came in flat and yellow in the late afternoon, the kind of light that made hospital rooms look briefly like somewhere people actually chose to be. "You work nights," Malone said. It was the first time she'd spoken directly to Nadia. "I do." "By choice?" "Now, yes. Nadia adjusted the IV line that had kinked slightly during the transfer. At first, it was because my brother worked nights. When he deployed the second time, I switched over. I told myself it was scheduling. I don't think it was really scheduling. Malone was quiet for a moment. How long ago did you lose him? 2 years in January. Atlas lifted her head from the floor, looked at Malone, put it back down. The small democracy of an animal deciding whether the emotional temperature in the room required action and deciding it did not. My handler, Malone said, his name is Desmond. He's been deployed since March. She's been with me since January when the threat profile on my case went up. She looked at the dog. She's been watching me the way he would watch me. I didn't know that was possible until I watched her do it. Nadia looked at the coin tucked inside her scrubs. She didn't take it out. She just held it there through the fabric. It is possible, she said. I know exactly what that looks like. At 4:47 in the afternoon, Strand appeared in the doorway with the specific expression of someone who has received information they expected and don't feel better for receiving it. The gray sedan from the parking structure had been tracked to an industrial property 4 miles east. A second individual was operating from that location. The cover story around Hackett's arrest had held through the afternoon, but at 3:30 someone had run an administrative query on the hospital's external scheduling system, an electronic access routed through a contracted IT vendor, pulling the nursing staff assignments for the 4th floor recovery ward. They know you're on extended hours, Strand said. You're flagged in the staffing log as the anomaly. They know I'm the continuity on Malone's case. We're assuming yes. Nadia looked at the window. Then the cover is effectively over. They know something went wrong with Hackett, even if they don't know the exact shape of what went wrong. And someone with IT vendor access just confirmed for them who's been in that room. She thought about it the way she thought through complex patient presentations, not linearly but in parallel, multiple variables simultaneously. The gray sedan left the structure. Where did it go? The industrial property, but the vehicle wasn't there when our team arrived. We have eyes on the property. We're waiting on a second individual. If there are 2 nodes and you have one, Nadia said, the second one is either going to go dark or accelerate. And accelerating in this context means moving directly on the patient before the window closes entirely. She looked at Strand. They need to move tonight, not tomorrow. Tonight. Strand's jaw was tight. Moving her creates a visible record. Keeping her in a room that 2 of their contacts have now been told about is a larger problem than a visible record. It wasn't an argument, it was arithmetic. Strand left to make calls. The clinical transfer took 22 minutes. Nadia ran it with the floor's night nurse, a steady woman named Petra, who had absorbed the situation with the specific composure of someone who had developed the useful ability to remain functional in circumstances that fell outside normal parameters without requiring those circumstances to be fully explained to her. They moved Malone to a room on the 2nd floor south wing, under a different name on the door placard, with Petra's badge logged as primary and Nadia listed as consulting, which was technically a creative interpretation of the staffing hierarchy, but not an incorrect one. Malone did not complain about the transfer. She asked 2 questions, where they were going, and whether Atlas was coming, and accepted both answers without comment. She was moving better than she had any right to be at 20 hours post-surgery, which told Nadia things about her baseline. When Nadia repositioned her in the new bed and adjusted the drain, Malone's hand found her wrist for a moment, not gripping, just the contact of someone confirming, by touch, that a thing was real. "You're still here," Malone said. "I'm still here. You've been on shift since last night." "Yes." A pause. That's a specific kind of commitment. Nadia checked the monitor leads. "So is keeping your own documentation for 14 months in a unit where someone is feeding your movements to people who want to use them." Malone went very still. Nadia looked at her. "Strand told me enough, not the name, but enough. I didn't know if anyone was going to find it before something happened to me." Malone's voice was flat in the specific way of someone who had been operating alone on a problem for so long that admitting the problem out loud felt like a structural risk. "I kept thinking, 1 more month, One more piece of documentation. Then it will be enough. Is it enough? Malone looked at the ceiling. I think so. I think tonight probably answered that question. The threat came through at 11:53 in the evening to a number that should not have had Nadia's contact information, an unknown number, 4 words, back off or else. She read it twice, then she forwarded it to Strand and called her immediately. Strand answered on the second ring. She was already aware. The surveillance team monitoring the industrial property had picked up outbound communication 20 minutes earlier. The second individual, a private contractor named Aldous Webb, former paramilitary, had received an update from somewhere inside the hospital's administrative infrastructure before going dark. He was in West Bridge. He had a room number. Not the old room, the new one. The transfer record propagated to a shared scheduling system, Strand said. Automated. We didn't catch it in time. He knows where she is. He's already in the building. Our team is 4 minutes out. She's on the second floor south wing. If he came through the north service entrance, he's already on this floor. She was already moving. She found him in the south corridor, 40 feet from Malone's room. He was wearing hospital facilities scrubs, the gray set that maintenance and overnight cleaning staff used. And he was checking door numbers with the methodical patience of someone who had a specific destination and was not in a hurry because he believed he had time. He didn't know she was watching. She stepped out of the alcove she'd been standing in. "Can I help you find something?" Her voice was the voice she used when she needed to communicate authority without triggering escalation. Calm, professional, slightly inconvenienced, the voice of someone who belonged entirely in this corridor and found the presence of unfamiliar people mildly administrative rather than alarming. He turned. He was good at controlling his face. There was a half second where she saw something real and then it was gone, replaced by confusion performed just well enough to pass a quick inspection. "Looking for a patient," he said, "family." "What's the patient's name?" A pause, the kind that lasted a beat too long. "Cressida Malone." "I don't have a Malone on this floor." She held his gaze and did not step aside. "You'll want to check with the main desk on the ground floor. They can direct you to the right unit." He looked at her the way people looked at an obstacle they were deciding whether to go through or around. Atlas came through the door at the end of the corridor. She moved without sound, without announcement, appearing in the hallway with the absolute focus of an animal that had made a full assessment of the situation before anyone asked her to and had reached her own conclusions. She positioned herself between Nadia and the man and stood there with a quality of stillness that communicated everything that needed to be communicated. He took a step back. The stairwell door at the far end of the corridor opened, and Strand came through it, credentials up, 2 more agents with her. He did not run. He ran the numbers, the way Nadia had seen people run numbers before, the specific internal calculation of someone weighing what they gained against what they lost, and he put his hands up before the second agent reached him. She stepped back against the wall and let Strand's team work. His name was Aldous Webb. He had been in Mercy Ridge for 36 hours. He had checked in at a motel 6 blocks from the hospital under a name that was real enough to pass a front desk check, and he had a phone that contained, according to Hollis Park's debrief the following morning, 11 days of communication with a network that connected back to a figure they had been building a case around for 14 months. That figure was Malone's unit commander, Lieutenant Colonel Drew Fenwick. 14 months of contact, matching almost exactly the window Malone had first noticed something wrong. The small timing issues, the intelligence that arrived slightly stale. The feeling, never provable, that someone at the table already knew what was on the table before the briefing started. She had reported it once. She had been told to recalibrate her assessment. She had not recalibrated. She had started keeping records. Strand delivered the confirmation at 7:30 the following morning in the consultation room, which had become their default operating space. She set a folder on the table and looked at Malone the way people looked at someone who had been right about something difficult for a very long time. The drive, Strand said. It's comprehensive. 17 documented incidents, time-stamped, 2 of them recorded. The second recording names someone above Fenwick, Malone said. It wasn't a question. Yes, civilian contractor with DoD adjacency. Strand paused. We'll execute simultaneously on both targets. 48 hours. We didn't have the endpoint of the chain until the drive gave it to us. Malone absorbed this. The look on her face was not relief exactly. It was the particular expression of someone who had been carrying something at full weight for long enough that when the moment of setting it down came, they didn't know immediately what to do with their hands. She looked at Nadia. The drive was in Atlas's collar, left side seam. Nadia thought about the dog moving alongside the gurney at 3:22 in the morning, moving carefully, precisely, as if attached to the patient by an invisible cable, as if the specific quality of attention that had kept Malone alive in a hostile unit for 14 months had been transferred into 75 pounds of Dutch Shepherd and carried into an ambulance and through a trauma bay and past every person who tried to stop it. The dog had been carrying the proof the whole time. She's always been working, Malone said quietly. I know, Nadia said. I could tell. The arrests happened on a Tuesday morning. Fenwick was taken at 0600 Road at a facility in Virginia, while he was in a scheduled briefing with people who did not yet know what was happening. The civilian contractor, a man named Roland Keyes, 53 years old, defense infrastructure consultant, with a professional biography that described 17 years of interagency experience and said nothing accurate about how those years had actually spent, was taken from the apartment he had been using in West Bridge as a surveillance base, a place with a direct sightline to Mercy Ridge Medical's main entrance. Nadia read about the arrests on her phone in her apartment, in actual clothes, with actual coffee, 3 days after she'd finally gone home. Her cat was on the table, which was not allowed, and she didn't have the energy to argue about it. The regional paper ran 4 paragraphs: military intelligence breach, multiple arrests, no names except Fenwick's, which had been unsealed, the specificity of what had actually happened, the drive in the collar, the hospital, the 14 months of documentation carried alongside a unit that didn't know it was being documented, wasn't there, it wouldn't be. She didn't expect it to be. What she thought about instead was the specific texture of what had happened in those 31 hours. The way a dog had stood in a corridor at 3 a.m. and made a decision based on something that no one present could fully explain, and everyone present had been forced to accept. The way that decision had cascaded: Hackett, the sedan, the vendor terminal, Webb in the corridor, the collar lining, the drive. All of it beginning with one animal's assessment of a challenge coin worn against the skin of a nurse whose brother had taught her, without meaning to teach her, exactly how to stand in a room with a working dog without making it a question. She thought about Boyd Hackett, who had been cooperating fully since his arrest and whose attorney was seeking a plea arrangement. She thought about Aldous Webb, whose contracting history was generating a separate and substantially longer case. She thought about Roland Keyes, 61 years old, whose professional biography would need significant revision. She thought about Drew Fenwick, who had been at a briefing table when they took him, among the people he had spent 14 months betraying. She wondered if he had seen it coming in the last few seconds, or if it had arrived the way that kind of ending always arrived, sudden and complete, the way a 14-month structure collapses when the single load-bearing element is finally removed. 6 weeks after the arrest, Nadia was finishing a chart on a 47-year-old man who'd come through the trauma bay with a crush injury from a warehouse accident when the front desk called and said there was a woman in the lobby who wasn't a patient, and she said Nadia would know who she was. Nadia knew before she reached the lobby doors. Cressida Malone was standing near the window. She was using a cane, which she held with the specific attitude of someone who resented needing it and had made a private agreement with themselves not to show that. She was in civilian clothes, jeans, a dark jacket, the look of someone who understood the concept of off-duty without being entirely comfortable in it. Atlas sat beside her in the tactical vest with the orange service dog marker, watching the lobby with the same quality of attention she brought to everything. Nadia crossed the lobby. They met somewhere near the middle. In the open space between the chairs arranged in their hospital configuration by someone who had never thought about how people in a waiting room actually wanted to move. "You look better," Nadia said. "The cane is temporary." Malone said it the way people said things they needed to say before the conversation moved past them. "I know it is." Malone reached into her jacket and produced an envelope. "Standard white," she said. "Official. Federal record, classified. Your name, your specific contribution, the timeline. It exists. Anyone with clearance can find it." She held it out. "It's not public, it won't be, but it's real." Nadia took the envelope. She thought about every time she had flagged something that mattered and watched the credit dissolve into the general functioning of the shift. Every time her instincts had been accurate and the word used about her afterward was reliable rather than exceptional. Every time the distinction between doing the job well and being seen to do the job well had been treated as a distinction that didn't need to be managed, because the kind of people who got recognized were not the kind of people who worked 3 a.m. trauma. She put the envelope in her jacket pocket. "I've applied for a position," she said. "Veterans Trauma Coordination at the hospital across town. They're building a protocol for civilian facilities that receive military patients outside of base hospital systems. The gap that existed in our trauma bay the night you came in, they're trying to close it." "That's not a small project." "No," Nadia said, "it's not." Atlas moved from Malone's side to Nadia's left. She didn't make a production of it. She simply relocated, stood there, and leaned her shoulder weight against Nadia's leg with the simple decision of an animal that had determined something was solid and worth leaning against. Nadia looked down at her. Atlas looked back up. There was something she had been trying to figure out how to say for 6 weeks, something she'd attempted in the car, on runs, twice while standing in the shower. She had never found a version that didn't sound either too large or too small. She tried it now. "The coin," she said. "I carry it because when Theo died, I didn't know what to do with the fact that he had taught me things I couldn't name. He didn't mean to teach me. He was just living his life, and I was paying attention. And then he was gone, and the things he'd taught me were still there, and for a long time I didn't know if they were useful or just weight." She looked at Malone. "I know now." Malone was quiet for a moment. "He'd know," she said, "if that matters." It did matter, in ways Nadia was still learning to hold without flinching. She had called her mother the previous Sunday. She hadn't mentioned the coin, not yet. Some things needed the right time, which was different from the nearest available time. But she had told her mother she'd been thinking about Theo, that she'd had a week that reminded her, specifically, of the things he used to say about working dogs. How they remembered everything. How they filed it and kept it and carried it forward without losing any of it, even after the person they'd learned it from was gone. Her mother had been quiet on the other end of the line for a long moment. "That sounds like him," she'd said finally. Yes, Nadia had thought, it does. Atlas leaned heavier against her leg, warm and certain, and Nadia stood in the lobby of Mercy Ridge Medical at the end of an ordinary shift, holding an envelope that said her name was real, in rooms she would never be allowed to enter, knowing that none of it was why she had walked toward the gurney at 3:22 in the morning. She had walked toward it because a dog had made a decision, and the man her brother had taught her, without either of them ever knowing that was what was happening, exactly how to honor it. That was the whole thing, she thought. That was all of it. She put her hand in her pocket and touched the coin through the fabric, the way she touched it at the start of every shift. And then she walked back into the hospital, and she went to work.